Hi, I'm David Gottfried. I'm currently the Chief Global Impact Officer of Blue Planet. We're focused on embodied carbon and concrete, which is about 8% of global emissions, and trying to deal with embodied carbon. This is maybe my 7th piece in the puzzle of sustainability, going way back to the beginning, studying solar engineering at Stanford University and designing my first net zero home in a class, I hate to date myself, but more than 4 decades ago. And that started this perpetual journey into the building industry to help define green building, which became the U.S. Green Building Council and the LEED rating system. Next piece was the World Green Building Council, bringing that U.S. GBC model and LEED around the world. And now we have 70 countries with green building councils. They're not all using LEED. Many have their own rating system where they can license or use LEED. But Australia, the Green Building Council of Australia has Green Star, and Singapore has Green Mark, and China 3-star. Just as an example, Japan has CASB. And many of those years since the beginning, I got into green technology and had something called Regenerative Ventures and Regenerative Network. And that's where I met the CEO of Blue Planet, Brent Constance, and decided to get off the advisory board. I was there 8 years and come full time to push to accelerate this product so we can get to concrete that's carbon neutral into the negative and start addressing embodied carbon in our buildings. Also had fun writing 3 memoirs, Explosion Green, public speaking, a podcast show called Regen 360.
Can we go back to the beginning and what set you down this path?
Why did a guy like me go down this path? That's a good question. Maybe I hit my head. I actually did a lot as a football player and snowboarder. Once flew off a horse at age 12 and landed on my head and woke up in the hospital. But I was an early backpacker in high school in Yosemite and fell in love with nature. And backpackers and engineers, which I am, they hate waste. They hate leaving any waste. They hate waste in any system. And when I got into the building industry, I saw enormous waste, whether it's landfills filling up with construction demolition debris, it's water that flows down the sewer system and gets treated with enormous energy and then put into the bay instead of just going through porous pavers and recharging the aquifer. Energy that's going, heating a building or a home or cooling it and then flying right out the wall because you don't have good insulation or leaky windows. That's waste. And even the embodied carbon of our products we make. Do we really want to spend such a carbon footprint to make the steel and the concrete? There's a broader waste, which is I've been trying to get at my whole life. I even have an equation for it called the full equation, which is R equals P minus I minus W. And R is the resultant of what we want to make, like a great concrete or a brilliant building. But we think R equals P, that product we're making, but it's actually reduced by I, the inputs, and W, the waste. And many inputs, such as energy and utility and money and time. But one of the greatest wastes is intellectual waste, because we can design better. We can go from net zero and sustainable into the regenerative. We can actually design a new economy which values not just net zero and regenerative, but the billionaires of tomorrow make a nega footprint, something that restores and regenerates and sustains, instead of just a taking economy where more is better and more pollution is okay. No, we can't afford those externalities.
What was the gap that you saw for you to, what was your on-ramp for you to get involved and do something?
How did I get into it? Well, it did start with Gil Masters, emeritus professor at Stanford, and teaching us about the sun and that the sun has enough energy for everything on Earth. Paul Ehrlich, who taught population growth, and he was a professor there, or Daniela Meadows, who wrote incredible books about our carrying capacity and living within the limits, but her book was called Beyond the Limits. Amory Lovin's early mentor at Rocky Mountain Institute with his first book, Soft Energy Paths, that I read in school. They just lit a fire on me, but then we had to learn to make that fire not have all the carbon going into the air and to make those electrons indeed renewable. And it never stopped. And then I got into development and construction in my first 10 years of a career and watched kind of the status quo of how things worked versus, say, my education. Later years, in around 1991, the American Institute of Architects had their Committee of the Environment. And because I was in D.C., I could go and learn from those gurus like Bob Berkebaugh, Randy Croxton, Bill McDonough, Greg Franta, Bill Browning. These are heroes that I could study and bring it back into my world, which was real estate development and finance. And integrating that all together with Mike Italiano, our attorney at the time, introduced me to ASTM standards and Committee E50 environmental assessment, and invited me to start the U.S.'s Green Building Subcommittee, and that just took off. And from that, we went with Rick Fedrizzi and Italiano starting the U.S. Green Building Council and LEED, and then later I got the idea for the World GBC, and here we are 30 years later with Green Building Councils in 70 countries. We built $1 trillion economy for green building. It's astounding and much to celebrate, but also still, when you look at the slope of climate change, now approaching 450 particles per million, we haven't really altered the slope despite this $1 trillion economy. So there's more work to do, and that's in embodied carbon.
Just if you could go on about, talk about the carbon, embodied carbon, and I guess in particular concrete. At what point did you identify that as being the key target?
Well, we've done really well in green building in the operational energy and lowering that. We've had the Energy Star program from the government for decades, and LEED helped, and all the manufacturers jumped in to create green products to tighten up our building envelopes and make the lighting and mechanical systems more efficient, the control systems. Solar has been phenomenal with the decrease of costs like that. So we're really coming down into the net zero in scope 1 and 2 operational energy and carbon, with a lot of the tech firms leading the way with net zero goals, and even with offsets getting to net zero historic footprint. But that embodied carbon, the energy used to make those building products, not just the extraction and the transportation, but you have the manufacturing, the operational, operational would be scope 1 and 2, but that first cost of carbon is quite high. And as the operational energy comes down, now that embodied carbon, the scope 3, can become more the substantial footprint. And it became very clear we needed to get at that, but it was hard to do. It's first impact category, the biggest by far is the concrete, 8% of global emissions. Second is steel. And I was on the advisory board of Blue Planet for 8 years, and they had this great Blue Planet University for 3 hours, and it was so compelling, the vision to build hundreds of Blue Planet plants all over the world and tapping direct into industrial CO2 emissions and sequestering it permanently. not spending tons of energy and pumping into the ground, but capturing it, mineralizing it in a biomimic way, the way the oceans have always done it, to make the coral reefs like the Great Barrier Reefs or the White Cliffs of Dover, that we could do that. And most of the concrete on Earth, as I've learned, is in the lithosphere, taking that CO2 out of the oceans and mineralizing it in those living things that die.
Oh, I'm sorry, you said most of the concrete. You mean most of the CO2?
I'm sorry, most of the...
Oh, so just take a breath and then... Yeah, so I can edit it, thanks.
I learned through the CEO of Blue Planet, Brett Constance, who's a Stanford professor and a geologist, that most of the carbon on Earth is actually stored not in the atmosphere, not in the oceans, but in the lithosphere. It's taking that CO2, like all the living things do, out of the oceans and mineralizing it with alkalinity, and then dying and going down and forming the lithosphere. And that's where most of the carbon is. And he studied, our CEO, how that occurred even without heat, and that through Blue Planet we could mimic it through a biomimic chemical reaction of taking calcium oxide or other alkalinity and having that react with captured industrial CO2 to create synthetic limestone, CaCO3, and that the lithospheres of the future could actually be concrete above grade. And that could go into the negative CO2 footprint and offset other things in the building to get at that embodied carbon. And the key was to accelerate this process. And so after the 3-hour Blue Planet University, I emailed Brent and said, I got to come full time and help accelerate this. This has to be everywhere. We can't wait. And that I jumped in just about 9 months ago.
So what does it take to accelerate the process? What for you are the kind of barriers, and what does it take to reduce those?
Well, we're working very hard at Blue Planet on acceleration, but I'm pushing, in addition, using my network that I built over the last 30 to 40 years in building the green building movement. And I see embodied carbon, Blue Planet, as the third wave of green building. The first wave was LEED and BREEAM in the UK is what is a green building and how much does it cost, how do you make it, does it work, what's the risk. That took 10, 15, 20 years. Second wave was, is that building healthy through WELL or the FitWell systems? And now the third wave is getting at the embodied carbon. How to accelerate? There's a lot of ways to do that. There's education. There's certainly our manufacturing process and fine-tuning it, which we're doing, making sure we have mixed designs that the marketplace can use, that the compressive strength is sufficient, which we're now hitting in the lab. We meet all the standards and codes, whether it's ASTM or ISO or American Concrete Institute, educating the back end of the industry, the building developers, the owners, to get ready to specify this product, to go even further. We can't wait till we make it and then they buy it. We have to get advance orders. We call it offtake agreements, or AMC's, advanced market commitments. We need a new procurement methodology that's been used in other industries like power plants and even the CLT structural lumber in solar RECs to gather together as an industry. We need to figure out where are you pouring concrete and when, how much, and get together with others to pre-order to then drive a Blue Planet plant in your location and then take those pre-orders to the bank and do it now and all work together in new ways of procurement.
So just to, and again, the audience is the average person like myself. So what you're saying
is this going okay though?
Yeah, no, it's going great. Yeah, absolutely.
Just keep any feedback, or you can tell me to be clearer, slow down,
sure,
or smile, or breathe.
This is good. This is good. So are you advocating, or is there a need for a kind of a fast track, almost like we did with COVID that we had to push through the whole RNA thing because there just wasn't time. Because we're not only is what you're saying ethically the right thing to do, but there is an emergency looming, if not already here.
This is beyond a crisis. This is beyond urgency. This is where we were with COVID and needing the government's help to come up with the vaccines immediately and be the purchaser of it. And government is lining up to slowly to purchase concrete with advanced market commitments. But this is just too slow. And we are working at Blue Planet with some of the biggest partners in the world, and they have hundreds of plants. We're talking to the biggest tech firms in the world, the biggest developers, the biggest countries. But every minute I hear this is too slow. We need to wake up. We need to go faster. And yes, we have to meet all the standards and codes. This is very important. It's structural. That's coming into place. But we can't take the status quo that the slow building industry does. We need to learn, from the moon launch that President Kennedy kicked off. We need to ring every alarm bell we have every day and ask the question, no matter what we're doing. If you're the architect designing the building, you're the contractor, you're the homeowner, how can we get our hands on carbon negative concrete, steel, EVs, faster and more. We need to reinvent this economy even more. And we're already doing great with ESG funds and triple and double bottom line venture capital. But this is the essence of wealth and value, is regeneration and survival. Because climate change is existential. And we're seeing more and more the hurricanes, the floods, the food crop issues, the impact everywhere. But when you run those models out, as our scientists have done, and they said 350 particles per million, that's the sustainable, that's the limit. And here we're headed fast towards 450. The Paris Agreement that we all agreed to says no more than 1.5 degrees C increase. And our trajectory in the GAP report we just had is 2.7 degrees C. We're in trouble, man. And this is about evolution. The technology's evolved, and Blue Planet and others, we could evolve more. But the part that's not evolving fast enough is the human brain. We are not waking up enough with our purchasing power, with our jobs, with our families, with our kids, with our educational systems. It is happening. There's a lot to celebrate, but it's not it's not fast enough. This is the bullseye. Well, I have something called the value rings, and the bullseye is life. That's what we all want. The ring one, V1, is life sustaining. And when you blow life sustaining, which is fresh air, food, water, security, and how about an atmosphere that works? When you blow that, you don't get V5, which is David's snowboard and his mountain bike. And so everything has to be retooled. And I don't want to say it isn't happening. We have natural capitalism, we have Biden's great IRA bill and the 45Q and future credits and DOE loan guarantees and Microsoft and Google's and Amazon's, really pushing hard. But it's just not enough. We need Blue Planet plants, hundreds of them being built right now with $40, $50 billion, and the money just flowing. And this will be the billions of the future. I can guarantee you that. Already we're seeing that. I just talked to a huge developer in the DC area today, and with this kind of down economy and all these financial banks and S&Ls going out of business and being taken over, and loans being recalled, and venture funds being put on hold, he's still borrowing hundreds of millions because he has a very deep ESG strategy. And so it's proving out. And that's the future of wealth and value, is life, the bullseye, and ring one, life sustaining. And I can guarantee you the trillions of the future will follow. And if you don't do this, you're negligent, and maybe grossly negligent, because that's where wealth is going, that's where money's going, and the world is waking up, but a little too slowly.
So if this, I mean, the science around, and this series is on climate restoration in general, and there's a number of different aspects of it that we're looking at. But you know, the science isn't quite there yet in terms of scale. I think it is with you guys pretty much, but in some of the other arenas. But it's, you know, I don't see anything there that's alchemical. You know, how do we make gold? We've got no idea. We do know. It's just a question of getting there and reducing the variables, I suppose, outside the lab. But it really boils down to the human behavior. That's the biggest challenge, I think. What are your thoughts on that? Because generally speaking, you know, comfort seems to be one of the biggest obstacles that, you know, people in their comfort, where they still have that ring 5 in their brains, they think they can just keep on snowboarding and stuff. So there isn't the impetus to move. How do we get around that?
Yeah, human behavior, human comfort and greed and more is better is the hardest part to hit, especially when we think of urgency. How can we embed this in everybody's brain from the second they're born to through every breath of their life, that they need to personally own regeneration? And really our personal footprints and spheres of influence can be quite broad, whether it's the homes we live in, the cars we buy, the purchases in the supermarket, the hardware store, the kids we raise, the jobs we do, the investments we make, the books we read. Everybody can do a lot more and wake up. Why don't we wake up? Well, we're busy. We're stressed out. We're just trying to put food on the table for our families. We're trying to improve our golf handicap. We're trying to have a little fun in this existence. I get it. But we're also given a life. And hopefully you're living a life of purpose and passion and mission. And when you think of your PPM, your personal Plan L, your legacy plan, do you have one? And it's more than just enough money in the bank for your family. It's more than paying off your mortgage or even just having a mortgage in a house. It's more than that. We were put here for a purpose. And I believe it's divine. And we need to get deep into our souls to hear that calling of regeneration. It's of a divine light. Well, what is light? It's electrons that are renewable. It's not necessarily the fire that puts the carbon up there. But there's also the light of our spirit and soul, that it is divine and renewable. And the best way to do that is to help Earth, to help humanity have a future, to help our kids and their kids have what we have. Not just to have a blowout party and say, it was a good one, good luck. And that's really what we're doing. We're handing off this broken earth that we got to be so privileged and enjoy. So we have to understand that. And that every decision we make, we could reach deeper. We could make our homes more energy efficient with better insulation, better windows, solar panels, a battery. We can buy those EVs. We could strive towards net zero in our own footprint. We could buy offsets when we plane travel. We could use Zoom more and not go places. We could recycle and compost and put in xeriscaping in our backyards, rip out the lawns. There's so much we can do. We can see if there's an ESG committee at work to work on environment, social governance. At least ask the question, what are we doing? We could encourage our kids to
study this in school and pursue it.
there's a lot of existing technology to go very far. We can get to net zero and even into the positive in operational energy now. We're all looking for the magic pill or the magic technology to save us, but we're not using what's on the shelves already. It's like weight loss. They want the pill, but they don't want to look at reducing the carbs or moving the body. You can do a lot by taking full accounting and responsibility with what we have today.
What's your level of optimism?
There's two types of your head hitting the pillow at the end of the day. There's the type when you can dream that night and wake up the next morning and hit it hard again. And then at some point there's the type when you don't wake up and this life as we know it is over. There's two types of calculations that go with that. One is, what can I do better tomorrow? Am I optimistic or pessimistic? And then at the end of this life, there's a question of, did I live that life of purpose, passion, and legacy? And what kind of legacy did I leave? And when I had that final breath, was I optimistic that we're gloom and doom? It wasn't gloom and doom? Or, I don't know how my kids are going to solve the problem that we contributed towards with the big footprint. I vacillate. I don't know when my final breath will be, but I'm still working harder at the purpose and passion and legacy. I'm here pleading with you to roll up the sleeves and redouble your effort and trust that this is the future of value and wealth. You will be rich. I know we want to make money, but a real rich life is also to give back and plant seeds for change that will build plants and trees that will take the CO2 out of the air and kick out O2. That's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be gardeners and groom and tend our gardens, and that could be your kid where you planted the seeds in them. So I'm optimistic when I meet those kids, whether it's at a university and they're so hungry and passionate and driven to do good, or I see a new technology that can make a big impact, or I hear about the LEED Platinum or the Living Building Challenge building, or a new country that has a better rating system and we can learn from them, or a new financial investment that's actually triple bottom line based. And I see our impact. That gives me hope. Or even a 3-year-old running around learning something new, and just that sparkle in their eye, and I think, they love life so much and they regenerate my spirit. Pessimism, when I study climate change, when I study the country existing policies that don't add up to their national commitments of the Paris Agreement, I see a lot of efforts that have no results. It's like playing the soccer game or the football game. At the end of the game, they measure how many times or how much yardage you had in running or passing in football, American football. In soccer, they don't measure how many times you passed or ran up and down the field. At the end of the day, you look at the scoreboard. How many goals did you put on the scoreboard? And my father had this paperweight, and it said, do not confuse effort with results. And the earth needs results, but results in the metric of earth, which is lowering the ppm, getting to the 1.5 degrees and holding it, recharging the aquifers, reforesting the world. Those are real results. And I'm seeing so many efforts that may be genuine, but they're putting solar panels on the Titanic that's running at the melting iceberg. And I used to get a lot of hugs for a lot of those panels on the Titanic. I refuse to work on those anymore. We need gigaton solutions. And we need it now, not tomorrow. And that urgent call. And so, optimism is we're still here. Another part, this real part of this behavioral equation, we're still operating by our old survival wiring from maybe millions of years ago when we were hungry, cold, and going to be eaten by somebody, some animal bigger than us that was a predator. Well, we don't have that problem so much on Earth for most of us that are lucky. We can go shopping at a nice supermarket and everything's there. We can turn on the heat. We can light a fire. But some of that survival wiring isn't serving us well because it still wants more, bigger, better, huge consumption beyond our needs. We're the only species that takes more than it needs and doesn't care about carrying capacity at all. We waste. We think nature is our, ingredient base for our creations with no penalty for externalities. And we're not rewiring our brain fast enough to get the new survival wiring to indeed survive. And that's an acceleration we need in the human brain plasticity so that that human can survive and evolve. And I call it the E-revolution. We have to put the letter E at the end of that word human so we can be humane. Not just human, which is to err, to be frail, to cultivate nature, but humane so we can survive, evolve, and give to the future those 7 generations. What about the 8th, not the 7th extinction?
That's great. Excellent. Thank you. Do you know